going on, vinyl community? Welcome to another video with the Record Spinner. In today's video, I'm going to be ranking the Emerson Lake Palmer studio catalog. Of course, Emerson Lake Palmer is one of the greatest progressive rock giants from the 1970s, a band that had bucket loads of talent from Keith, Greg, and Carl as individuals, and they are a band that I am very fortunate and thankful for appreciating at such a young age, and it's thanks to them that I got subjected to and enjoy a bit of classical music with their adaptations, which made them so distinguished. Now, with their catalog, and I'm sure the ELP fans will agree at large, that basically everything is solid gold up until a certain point, and then everything kind of fizzles afterwards. And you'll see what exactly I mean when it comes down to this ranking. Now, like I always say, this ranking is solely my opinion. It is neither right or wrong. If you think their first album is their best album, then I respect your opinion, but who knows, maybe we'll agree on some things. So enough with the chit chat, let's jump into what this video is all about. Now, as I stated in the beginning of this video, as well as the title, I will be focusing on the studio catalog. And I was very much on the fence on including pictures at an exhibition, since it is a piece of music that doesn't appear on any studio album, and it is a significant part of their discography, but still it is classified as a live album, so that is excluded. And I am also not including Emerson, Lake and Powell and the Three group, because it isn't Emerson, Lake and Palmer, despite how many thirds of the band were involved at any given time. So that gives us 9 studio albums, and coming in at number 9 at the bottom of the barrel is this one. No, it is not Love Beach. It is 1994's In the Hot Seat. This was the band's last album, and it is a shame that they capped off their recording career with this record because it does not really have any redeeming qualities to it. Personally, the main reason why I have this vinyl copy in my hand is because I am a completist. Just doesn't really have any redeeming qualities. It is very forgetful, very middle of the road, and it simply does not really bear the mark of the classic ELP sound. And also at the same time when this album was being recorded, there was also some issues going on behind the scenes with Keith Emerson's nerve issues and Carl Palmer's carpal tunnel syndrome. So the sessions were kind of plagued with some setbacks. So they can really make the most of it. There are a few interesting things on here. The opening track, Hand of Truth, sounds promising, but that's really the only kind of lively track on this record that kind of sounds like it has some life in it. The track Daddy is a very touching song, since it is about the Sarah Ann Wood story, which is a very touching subject matter. They do a rendition of Bob Dylan's Man in the Long Black Coat, but there are no classical adaptations, none of it. It's just very, like I said, middle of the road, and I think they probably would have been better off if this album did not come out. I know that that sounds harsh, but believe me, when it comes to approaching ELP, this is an album for simply completists only. Coming in at number 8 is this album. All right, it was bound to happen at some point. 1978's Love Beach, aka the laughingstock of the progressive rock world. So basically, with this album, the band had broken up at this point, but they owed Atlantic Records one more album. So this album is more or less a contractual obligation, but they did not go into the studio attempting to just put together something haphazardly for the sake of fulfilling their contract. They wanted to make an album in good faith in an attempt to sort of make the commercial crossover like some of their contemporaries had done, such as Genesis and Yes. And it did not necessarily work because fans did not dig this album as well as the critics. Basically, side A features much more shorter songs. So things such as All I Want Is You, the title track, Taste of My Love, which has some absolutely cringy lyrics, some of Peter Sinfield's worst lyrics ever. The Gambler, For You, I mean, For You is kind of okay. The real big highlight on this album is Canario, which is a Rodrigo composition. It's them doing classical adaptations. It's ELP doing what they did best. And then the album rounds off with a big side-long epic on side 2 called Memoirs of an Officer and a Gentleman, which in theory is the last true ever Emerson, Lake Palmer sidelong epic, since they do like to do their sidelong epics, but it just does not have the energy and the excitement and the life that pieces such as Carnival 9 and Tarkus had. It just lacks something. But just everything just down to the way that this album was approached, and also just the album cover as well. It's been said 1,000,001 times, and I'm going to say it 1,000,002. They look like the Bee Gees. And when it comes down to progressive rock, this is not the image of it. Some people will give this album some points for various reasons, and I can kind of see why. But basically, they tried to make the crossover, and unfortunately, it did not happen. And after this album, the band basically broke apart until the early 90s. And for a while, a lot of people thought that this was it. But that is not exactly the case, because coming in at number 7 is this album. 1992's Black Moon. Now, this is the reunion album that they did when the band got back together after 14 years. And honestly, I have a lot of fondness for this album. There are some great tracks on it, such as the title track, which was like the main single off of it. Paper Blood is a great kind of bluesy tune with some heavy emphasis on Hammond organ. You kind of get a sense of that old school classic ELP sound. Affairs of the Heart, which is a track that Greg Lake wrote with Jeff Downes for a project called Ride the Tiber, which never came to fruition. And then we get into traditional classical adaptation territory with Romeo and Juliet by Prokofiev. Keith Emerson does an arrangement of it, which is quite good. Farewell to Arms is a great piece. A very poignant song, indeed, in the ELP canon, considering that they did perform it live at their last show at the 2010 High Voltage Festival, which ultimately became their last show. And then on the B side, there's Changing States, which is a Keith Emerson composition. Better Days, Close to Home. You have kind of Keith Emerson doing, his various piano bits. You have Greg Lake doing his sort of traditional acoustic ballads. So overall, I think it does cover all the bases. But overall, like, the sound on this album, it's almost sort of up to date and almost overblown as well, which then again, ELP is completely overblown in many senses, but I love them so much for that. Because at this point, keep in mind, it's the early 90s, technology such as like MIDI was being introduced, so they were able to really augment their sound with it sounding as full as possible and as orchestrated, considering the complexity of their music. So overall, the sound is a bit different. Some may say it sounds kind of dated in some areas, kind of almost 80s-ish. But I think ELP were really, ones to really embrace it and work it into their sound. So kudos to them. But this is an album that I do think is quite solid. And I would say in terms of, the later era albums, this is the sole album to check out. Coming in at number 6 is this album. 1977's Works Volume 2. Now, they added a Volume 1 tagline to the first Works album, so they had to deliver a Volume 2. And this album right here is basically their odds and sods album. This brings together various outtakes and leftovers from previous albums, non-album singles, B-sides, things of that sort. But aside from this being an odds and sods type of release, I think this album works very well in terms of it sounding quite commercial. And that's just down to the fact that there's no real epics on this. All the songs kind of average roughly, 3 to 4 minutes in length. But what I think makes this work is the fact that there is a lot of variety in terms of music and genres on this record. You have tracks such as Tiger in a Spotlight and Brain Salad Surgery, which are outtakes from the sessions for Brain Salad Surgery. The track, and this is a tongue twister, When the Apple Blossoms Bloom in the Windmills of Your Mind, I'll Be Your Valentine. That was a B-side to the Jerusalem single. Bullfrog is an outtake from Carl Palmer's, sessions for his side on the Works album. Watching Over You, fantastic Greg Lake ballad. Maple Leaf Rag, Scott Joplin composition. Keith Emerson does that with an orchestra, more than likely from the Work sessions. I Believe in Father Christmas, fantastic Greg Lake solo single. There's an alternate version that appears on this. Then, of course, there's also Honky Tonk Train Blues, which was a Keith Emerson single that he did by himself that appears on this. Close But Not Touching, that is a Carl Palmer and Harry South composition, more than likely from the Work sessions. And it rounds up with a cover of Show Me the Way to Go Home, which rounds it off quite nicely. So just as you can tell there, just between the various kind of rocking tracks, some stuff with an orchestra, the various, more honky-tonk type stuff and the more ballady type stuff, there really is so much variety on this record. And I think that if they were to approach Love Beach in that style of having as much musical variety while keeping things rather concise at the same time, perhaps it could have worked. And I think this album definitely should be taken for what it is, not just as like sort of just a collection of leftovers. If you take it in as whole, it kind of does work, and it's kind of a big what if things could have progressed further in this direction. Coming in at number 5 is this album. 1977's Works Volume 1. Now, after a 3-year absence from the public eye, ELP returns with this double album, and they kind of flex out their muscles a little bit. Each member gets a side of an LP, and I think it just kind of works so well considering the fact that the band has 3 members, so you have sides 1, 2, and 3, and then the whole band joins together on side 4. So, Keith Emerson on side 1 does a piano concerto, which really flexes out his abilities as a composer, works with an orchestra, fantastic stuff. Side 2, you have Greg Lake doing what Greg Lake does best, tons of ballads, accessible songs, such as C'est la Vie, great song with a little accordion piece in there. And of course, another big highlight that I feel like sometimes gets overlooked is Closer to Believing. I think it is probably the single best thing that Greg Lake and Peter Sinfield wrote together. It is so beautiful. On side 3, Carl Palmer's side, he kind of does a little bit of everything. He does an adaptation of Prokofiev's The Enemy God Dances with the Black Spirits. He also does the Bach 2-part invention in D minor, Food for Your Soul with Harry South. Even Joe Walsh does some scat singing and such on one track. He even does a re-recording of Tank, which is on the first album. And then on side 4, we have the whole band together. They do a rendition of Aaron Copland's Fanfare for the Common Man, which is absolutely sensational. Adds a little bluesy middle section in there outside of the main composition. Just works well. And then we have, I think, the last great Emerson, Lake and Palmer epic, and that is Pirates. Originally done as, for the Dogs of War, but then instead turned it into a more Pirates theme. Includes an orchestra on here. It is just absolutely phenomenal. And there's orchestra all over this record. And I think because of that, that is what led to ELP bringing out an orchestra on the road with them. For the Works tour, which did not last long at all just because of financial reasons. But of course, there are various documents out there, such as the Olympic Stadium show from Montreal in August of 77, which has them playing with the orchestra. That stands out as a true testament to what they were able to do with them live. And basically, it was just all down to recreating what you heard on the record live in concert. And it worked temporarily. But no, this is honestly quite a solid album to showcase each individual member, what they're, able to do. And there's definitely a lot of variety on here. But then like that fourth side with Fanfare and Pirates, it hits the sweet spot. Like they really returned in very fine form after taking such a long break between Brain Salad and this album. Definitely a solid listen. Coming in at number 4 is this album. 1970s Emerson, Lake and Palmer. This is their self-titled debut album. And with this album, they basically set out to do what they were aiming to accomplish with tons of classical adaptations as well as their own touches. So the album opens up with The Barbarian, which is this nice, gritty, driving piece, a rendition of the Bela Bartok composition Allegro Barbaro. Take a Pebble, which is a beautiful Greg Lake composition, nice soothing vocals in the verses, and then the middle section has some nice kind of jazz-infused piano bits as well as another acoustic bit in the middle. Very, very nice. Knife Edge, which works in some Janicek and Bach type influences with some original lyrics, which is very cool. The Three Fates, which is Keith Emerson's big kind of spotlight on the record. It is a 3-part suite, which works in some Royal Festival Hall organ. There's a piano solo and a piano trio. And then Tank, which is basically a Carl Palmer showcase in the middle with a drum solo. And then, of course, the big single that was off of this was Lucky Man. And it is a fantastic Greg Lake composition, one that he wrote when he was 12 years old. And, of course, features that off-the-cuff Moog synthesizer solo, which is so distinguished. And despite it being off-the-cuff, it is literally a note-for-note type of solo. Like, it works so well in that context. So basically, you have one half of the album being the classical adaptations, and then the other half is devoted to kind of each member collectively. And honestly, this is one of the most solid debut albums ever. Lots of tracks have remained in their set list, and it is a great way to kick off such an enduring recording legacy with this album. Coming in at number 3 is this album, 1971's Tarkus. Now, this album features the first ELP sidelong epic with the title track Tarkus, which is a song that Greg Lake was very reluctant to work on, but still proceeded further with writing lyrics for. Tells the tale of a half-tank, half-armadillo creature, the one that appears on the cover, and how it loses a battle with a manticore, which basically the track is kind of told by the various kind of storyboards that appear in the gatefold sleeve. And that takes up the first side. Total ELP classic, such a standard in their catalog. And then the flip side of this album is devoted to relatively shorter songs. So we have a good bit of fun with Jeremy Bender, Bitches Crystal, which is kind of a cool, kind of jazzier type of piece. The Only Way, which features in some Bach adaptations, Infinite Space, which is a nice kind of conclusion, Time and a Place, great tune, and then there is a good bit of fun at the end of this album, which was done towards the tail end of the sessions with the song Are You Ready, Eddie, which is a reference to their engineer, Eddie Offord, who of course worked with Yes and others. Kind of done in the style of the song The Girl Can't Help It. It is just a good bit of fun that wraps up this album, and honestly, one of ELP's finest moments. Coming in at number 2 is this album, 1972's Trilogy. This is my favorite Emerson Lake Palmer album, and this is definitely their most complex record in terms of the arrangements and the production. There are so many layers going on this album, and you can kind of see why, not many tracks from this album appeared in the live set, just because it was so hard to reproduce live, especially with the band being a 3-piece. Opens up with the Endless Enigma, which is a suite kind of divided up in 3 parts, technically. Not really, because there's parts 1 and 2, and then with a few smacked in the middle, kicks off the album to such anthemic heights. And then there is From the Beginning, which is a lovely Greg Lake acoustic ballad. There's a good bit of fun on this album with the country-themed Sheriff, as well as Living Sin. Hoedown is on this album. Hoedown is a Aaron Copland composition, huge stage favorite, always opened up the gigs nicely. Then there is the title track, which is absolutely beautiful. Starts out as a sort of piano ballad, and then in the middle just goes all over the place. The Moog synthesizer really kicks in, and it just, like I said, goes all over the place. And then the album wraps up with Abaddon's Bolero, which is a bolero that Keith Emerson composed. And as the piece progresses, just more and more instruments just come in, and it sounds very orchestral. You can almost hear an orchestra playing when you hear the various synthesized parts being introduced as the song progresses. Absolutely phenomenal record. Like I said, it's my favorite. It's just all over the place. They're most complex and just absolutely beautiful in every single way. And that leaves one more album to fulfill the number 1 spot. And honestly, you guys kind of saw this coming. 1973's Brain Salad Surgery. If you're wondering what the peak of ELP's powers were, it is this album. This is their absolute greatest masterpiece. And I think it has all of the essential elements that make a classic Emerson Lake Palmer album. Opens up with Jerusalem, which is a hymn written by Hubert Parry, matched with William Blake's words. It is unapologetically English, and I think that is a quality that some people won't focus in on when it comes to ELP, because there was such a gravitation towards European classical music and just overall just the sense of Britishness with ELP. So I think them opening the album with that track is a very nice nod, and it is just absolutely anthemic. And then we have a classical adaptation of Toccata from Gianastera's first piano concerto, the 4th movement, which features a great Carl Palmer drum solo in the middle with his stainless steel electronic drum kit with the various sequenced samples and such. It is just absolutely awesome. Then we have a beautiful acoustic ballad from Greg Lake called Still You Turn Me On. Benny the Bouncer, which is a good bit of comedic relief, kind of set it like in a honky-tonk type setting, which is good fun. And then you have the massive epic Carnival 9. So epic that it could not fill just side 2 of the album. It also had to cover a bit of side 1. So you have First Impression Part 1 on side A, then you flip the album over, you have Part 2 of the First Impression, and then the second and third tells the story of, you know, humans versus computers, almost like the ultimate fight in battle between who is better and who is perfect. And just like that alone, it has all of the essential qualities. You know, you have, you know, the British hymns, you have the classical adaptations, the Greg Lake ballad, the good bit of comedic relief, and the big epic. They were just firing on all cylinders with this record, even just down to the album cover, which was done by H.R. Geiger, which opens up like this. You have the alien inside, and if you look on the bottom there, there is the first use of the classic ELP logo that we all know to kind of associate the band with. But yes, I mean, if there is a go-to album when it comes to this band, it is this album, hands down. It has all of the essential qualities that make a quintessential Emerson, Lake and Palmer record. Just brilliant from start to finish. So there you guys go. That is my ranking of the Emerson, Lake and Palmer studio catalog. If you enjoyed this video, please go ahead, give it a like, subscribe to the channel. And if you want to support this channel, be sure to check me out on Patreon. See you guys in the next video. And most importantly, keep the records spinning.